almost like you're speaking a different language too, because the supplies that are needed for the patients, what you're saying as a clinical person versus an administrative person can be very different. And when the patient's life hangs in the balance, you've got to make sure that you completely understand the ask, and then you're able to provide that product.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we speak with Deric Gallagher, Supply Chain Manager at Centura Health, and Rachel Anderson, Corporate Director of Supply Chain at Baptist Health. We're going to be talking about their work with the Young Professionals Advisory Council through AHRMM and really developing a pathway for entry-level young professionals coming into supply chain, not only attracting new talent, but also having roles that are identified that they can move into. What about internships? And then at that point, once they come in, how do we grow from there? And so, Hayes, I'm excited to talk to these two, and they have a real vision for young professionals and a passion for what it takes to bring in new talent, which we know is a huge need right now.
Massive need. Both, we need it at all levels in supply chain, but Rachel and Deric have really good ideas. They have a lot of passion around it. And, I listen to it. And also I hope anybody who does listen comes aboard and really helps and kind of pushes us forward, because this is a team effort for everybody in supply chain.
Excellent. We're going to be right back with Deric and Rachel. Stay with us.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Deric Gallagher, Supply Chain Manager at Centura Health, and Rachel Anderson, Corporate Director of Supply Chain at Baptist Health. And this has been an interview a long time coming. I've been excited for it. We're going to be talking about young professionals in supply chain and specifically highlighting the work the two of you are doing with the Young Professionals Advisory Council with AHRMM. So I just want to thank you both so much for coming on. Rachel, we'll start with you. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And there's so much that Deric and I want to share about the Young Professionals Advisory Council.
And Rachel, maybe you can talk about your background. What's your experience? What brings you to this stage in your career in healthcare supply chain?
Absolutely. So I have been with Baptist Health in Montgomery, Alabama for 11 years now. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. So I started out as a supply chain major grad and a health administration grad from Auburn University. Did an internship here at Baptist, and then they hired me, and I have been fortunate enough to work through open positions and grow within the organization.
And Deric, we'll kind of have you talk about your background as well, but we love having you both on today, and I think it's a very important topic.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan, so I'm really excited to be on here. I think Rachel mentioned I've listened to pretty much every single episode. And I have to ask, before I get started on myself, who came up with the intro? Because I love the voice. You're just in time to stock up on inside, and who came up with it? That was good.
I think I wrote the script, but we were thinking about Sam Elliott. And, little known fact about all of our other podcasts, we change the intro every season and come up with a different voiceover artist, and we just can't let go of this guy. So we've been sticking with it for the duration.
Yeah,
he
he's the man,
reminds
no
me.
doubt
I
about
love
it. Absolutely. He has that great.
He just reminds me of the movies.
Yeah, he has that trailer, sound to him, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been with Centura Health about 7 years now. 7 years ago, I was that business school kid studying supply chain who had no idea about healthcare and just didn't really know exactly what I wanted to jump into other than I like supply chain. So from there, I did end up getting an internship with one of the healthcare providers in Colorado and eventually moved over to Centura Health, where I've been very much focused on the day-to-day operations, but I've held roles both at the corporate office as well as at the facility doing the day-to-day stocking, ordering, managing the people, all the stuff that makes it all run.
Deric, you're a Colorado Buffalo fan, right?
Go Buffs. Yeah.
All right. So, and of course, Rachel's a War Eagle. She's an Auburn fan. Which one who is a better mascot? I'm just curious.
I mean, you can't compare the two. Ralphie is a legendary.
I don't know. I mean, we have both an eagle and a tiger, so.
Oh, okay.
That's not fair.
Okay, you know what? I think Rachel wins. They've got two.
Yeah. And we fly our eagle around the stadium.
We run our buffalo around the stadium.
Gary, Justin, y'all want to break this tie here?
I'm going to give it over to Gary. He's from Idaho.
I mean, Tatanka, Buffalo. I'm kind of a Colorado, John Denver, Rocky Mountain High kind of fan. So I don't know. I like both. I don't know if I can judge either one. I got to be sensitive. The conversation's not over yet, but I like them both. Hayes, great icebreaker as usual. I mean, seriously.
Ralphie's pretty cool though.
Yes.
Okay, we'll carry on.
So, Deric, something that you kind of described was, how you found your way into healthcare supply chain. And I know when the three of us talked, there's a lot of conversation around people just kind of feeling like they fall into it. And I can tell you a lot of the interviews that we've had, and people have done their own bios and talked about how they got into healthcare supply chain, including an episode you both referenced was the end of last season with Joe Walsh, and really just talking about how people just kind of find their way into it. And you all had mentioned to me that you felt like to work with, new professionals coming into this industry, that we wanted to make this a destination career, that this was something that people learned about and then went to school for. And I think there's been some progress on that front, but overall, we're going to need an infusion of a lot more talent. And I wanted to kind of pose this to either of you, but as far as the purpose of the Young Professionals Advisory Council through AHRMM, can you talk about that and how that's addressing this and the kinds of work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if everyone is familiar with AHRMM, but they're the leading professional membership group for the healthcare supply chain. So their mission is to advance health through supply chain excellence by providing education, leadership, advocacy to professionals in healthcare. And they actually did a survey back in 2018 where they interviewed over 300 young professionals. And what they found is there's a need for young professionals within the organization and, of course, the workforce. Like we've seen in many other industries, the baby boomers are retiring. We don't have enough young professionals and millennials stepping into these positions for leadership. So that's kind of what started the whole Young Professionals Advisory Council.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit of your successes so far and where you feel like there's an opportunity to push, more and more forward with bringing young professionals in to healthcare supply chain and making them feel like they have all the resources that they need to succeed.
Yeah, when we started this in 2018, the vision was to connect, advise, represent, and really engage young professionals into healthcare supply chain, but doing that through the education platform of AHRMM. And so that's one of the things that is kind of our mission as young professionals is how do we reach out, network, and engage. Deric, do you want to kind of talk on some of our successes so far?
Sure, yeah. So how I got introduced to the Young Professionals Advisory Council was actually through what I thought was a really successful roundtable session that they did in person at the conference. had to have been 2018 or so, right when you guys got started, where they brought in the bosses, right? Where, as a young person, we got an opportunity to sit at a table with an executive from all sorts of different aspects of the supply chain and just ask them pretty much anything we wanted for an hour. And I absolutely loved it. I met a ton of leaders. I met a ton of people my age who were also, just as excited as I was. And that's when I started following Rachel around at the vendor fair for like the next 2 hours. And I think that's a huge success right there, is the different sessions, not following Rachel around. That was successful, but the sessions that the YPAC puts together, and that being one of them. Another of my favorite sessions that we put together was a resume building session where Rachel and the others, this was before I was involved, they put together a panel of recruiters and people that look at resumes every single day for all sorts of different industries. And they just had a great panel that I listened to on putting your resume together and some interview prep, stuff like that. And as a young professional who, I wasn't looking to jump ship at my company at the moment, but, I really got some good notes out of it that I thought was just really valuable.
Rachel and Deric, we talk about young professionals. I feel like I'm the old guy in the room, tenured, been here a long time, both on the supplier side and then on the supply chain side, and kind of worked my way through the ranks as you both have done too.
You can say that again.
Thanks, Hayes. You're right there with me, Hayes. I mean, your hair looks better than mine, though. But anyways, so moving forward, but the question I have for Rachel and Deric is, what are some of the constraints on trying to bring the new talent into the industry? I looked at a lot of resumes back in the day, and you were talking about resume building and just kind of looking at the attributes from, supply chain has evolved. It's not just the box on the dock and get it somewhere. It's become analytics. It's become purchase services. It's become consignment, all these bits and pieces in so many areas you can go. How do you direct people, or how do you try to bring in this new talent and get them really interested in one of those areas? What are some of the challenges, and how are you overcoming some of that as the young professionals coming in?
I feel like that's such a multifaceted question. I could probably take it in a couple different directions. I feel like I'm kind of an enigma. So I am one of the few people I know that graduated in both health administration and supply chain. A lot of times you'll hear supply chain grads come out of school, and supply chain itself is a fairly new degree. So before that, there was logistics, vendor management, things like that, operations management. But I'd say in the last 10 to 15 years, supply chain has become an actual degree that carries a lot of weight. And I found, I think there were 120 people that graduated from supply chain at Auburn, and I was the only one that went into healthcare. So everybody was going into these big industry, big tech jobs. They want to go work for Amazon, for Google, for these really exciting, companies that they get to travel, do a lot with innovative technology, but they're not talking about healthcare. And then when I had my health administration classes, we didn't have a single supply chain class. And when I had supply chain classes, we didn't have a single health administration class. So it's really interesting to me to talk to other young professionals and ask them, how did you get started in this industry? So I definitely think that's a challenge I've seen.
To go off of Rachel's point, pretty much every young professional that I talk to right now, that I do ask them these questions, they get into it for somewhat of a mission and purpose reason. But, there's not always that connection to be made, right? So, like, for example, there were some students that got a scholarship to this year's AHRMM conference that Pampers sponsored. And just talking to one of them, her mom had been a patient. And that's really the only reason that she was studying healthcare and that she had decided to do an internship in it, right? And so you find a decent amount of that, but the disconnect between this little, not so little niche that we are all talking about right now, it's just not built into the programs at a lot of schools yet. A few schools are figuring it out where they're doing healthcare supply chain programs. Rachel, you are an enigma. I had never heard of it until, last year or so. But I think that there has been a lot of progress. in trying to start to combine the two, but a lot of work to be done as well.
And that's one of the things that we're focused on as part of the Young Professionals Advisory Council. And the reason AHRMM created us in the first place is how do we work with universities and colleges to mentor students, to bring them in and even let them know about healthcare supply chain as a degree and as a profession. So AHRMM actually surveyed, they have over 1,869 members, and they found that 176 of those are young professionals, which is less than 10%. And then they found of that, 8 to 10, or maybe even 15 were students. So that just shows right there that there's little to no student involvement whatsoever in what the industry is saying is the leading professional membership group for healthcare supply chain. So that's a big problem right there. And that's something that we as a task force are being asked to do. So how do we develop and work with the colleges and universities on these internship programs, work with organizations to make sure that we have those available and then plug people into that?
You know, hey, sorry. This 1 sec. I got to come back to the mission. You know, you talked about mission and the patient-centered focus. And, you know, that is my bailiwick, my bandwagon, my passion. And I loved hearing that. But I really do think there is a big opportunity where we have to talk about this support services piece does affect patients' lives. It does. I mean, I think you guys hit the nail on the head talking about that. We've got to get into the universities and the colleges, and part of the curriculum to say, when you're trying to get a drug-eluting stent, or you're trying to get a pacer, or you're trying to get an implant, to make sure it is ready for the patient on the table. Sometimes it could be a life-ending situation, and these are not just elective surgeries. We've got trauma, we got codes, we got ICUs, especially with what's happened in the past. This is a really, really big deal. So just love the fact that Deric and Rachel, you both comment on that. So thanks for bringing that up. Hayes, go ahead.
You hit his hot button.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
One thing I was going to say about that too that's so unique and just interesting about this industry is it's almost like you're speaking a different language too, because the supplies that are needed for the patients, what you're saying as a clinical person versus an administrative person can be very different. And when the patient's life hangs in the balance, you've got to make sure that you completely understand the ask, and then you're able to provide that product. So.
That's well put. All right, here's a dumb question. What's considered a young professional? At what age are we talking here?
So
you want in the group? Hayes, you want in the group? Is that what's going on here?
I can do a little hair color. I might be able to fit in there. I don't know.
So AHRMM identifies it as 35 years and younger. Some organizations say 40, but they did go with 35.
Oh, I'm close. Okay, good.
Square root.
Well, we have quarterly sessions that the YPAC puts on that anyone can attend, right? And we have LinkedIn groups that anyone can jump on and get connected with the young professionals. So that's another success that we've kind of had, going back to those successes. So one thing, Gary, that you said, and Rachel as well, is the supply chain piece of the hospitals. A lot of people are in it for the mission, and I'm glad that's that's what you love. But the supply chain piece to it is invisible for the most part, right? So when a student is looking for a new job, or when anyone's really looking for a new job, the supply chain aspect of healthcare isn't necessarily in commercials. It's not sold to, it's not visible to anyone, right? So putting supply chain a little bit more as the face of some of these healthcare provider companies, obviously the nurses and the doctors, that's the focus. That's who we support, right? But I think that there's a little bit of an opportunity to help the supply chain and all the different support services out by kind of emphasizing and selling the mission to the people that want to jump into those facets of the business. So
that's good, Deric. The only person that makes supply chain sexy is Hayes Waldrop. I mean, he talks about it all the time. I mean, he is the man. So
that is you probably uniquely positioned at this time, and maybe our lifetimes even after the pandemic, to kind of hone in on supply chain and highlight that, because it is so prevalent now with the pandemic, with the global supply chain shortages that we've had. to kind of highlight this career. And that's what, we want to capitalize on that and take that time to really show that healthcare supply chain is a destination career field, and that we want to provide an opportunities and resources to get people into those positions.
I think a lot of times just career pathway, like you say, destination career, but then the pathway isn't always outlined, which is kind of like what I was describing at the beginning. People sometimes haphazardly land in one of these positions and then they really enjoy it because of the mission and because of the intrinsic value of being in this space. But even the skill sets that are learned in some of these formal supply chain degrees don't necessarily apply in healthcare because it's such a unique scenario. And I think as we're trying to bring new talent in, we also don't show them sort of the career pathway. And so you can even set up internships. And I don't think I'd say probably the incidence of internships being available out there is lower than it should be. I think we'd like to see an increase in that for people coming out of school or in the later, parts of their schooling. But then also, how do we show them that there's a job for them that can help take them to where they want their career to go if they were in sort of an internship to hire? Because that's how a lot of internships work. You're basically showcasing yourself that when you graduate, you're worthy of coming on board and filling, a staffing gap or a staffing need for the organization. So I know there's a lot of pieces in what I said there as far as like skill development, internship availability, and then getting to a point where there's an entry level role. But that's just the career pathway in. And I feel like there's a lot of gaps in that component. I don't know if you two feel the same way.
There's a lot of gaps. I started as an intern, and, my experience as an intern with a facility here in Denver was eye-opening, right? And then at the very end of it, when I was really excited to jump into the industry, the positions that they had available for me just really didn't fit my skill set. They were able to offer me a supply chain tech job or a job as a buyer, and I had just finished my master's degree and wanted to do more. So there was a bit of a gap there. Right. And so it's, you guys on past episodes have kind of talked about how there's, supply chain right now needs a new type of soldier. In your interoperability episode, you guys talked about that. Some of the schools are developing them, right? And the people with supply chain degrees, I can tell you 100 different ways to set a PAR level because I took an entire semester class on it, where we were learning how to use standard deviations of lead times and work that into how you're setting your PAR levels. And every single facility I've been to in my 7-year career is using an average of a 100-day purchase history, right? And I'm still doing it right now, and I'm a supply chain manager, right? So there's not only the gap in is the position available, but is the organization as a supply chain at the place it needs to be in order to take full advantage of this talent that is growing and coming in. A lot of people in my position might have said, healthcare's cool, the mission's great, but man, they're far behind. I'm going to go do work at Charter Communications, where it's going to push my skills a little bit more in a different way, and maybe I'll get paid more too.
What about specialization? Can we afford that? Like, I feel like on one hand, what you're talking about is like the skill set match, but also, the level of education, an entry level for somebody with a higher level of education might not match the organization and where they're looking to fill positions. But I'm also thinking on the one hand, and the interoperability episode might have highlighted that as well, that there's a need for specialization. But if we do that, do we actually mismatch a lot of potential new entries? And do we need to get a little bit further along with the availability of talent before we start looking at specialization at the entry level? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good point. I've never really thought about that before. Initial thoughts are that I think a lot of the specialization that I see right now kind of comes in the form of consulting. And the organizations are, they're consuming the specialized consultants that have that very niche experience knowledge, and they're bringing it in that form to their organization. They're bringing those skills, that valuable stuff from the consultants. But I don't know if that completely answers your question, but that was where my first thought was.
Actually, it does. It kind of tees me up for the whole leadership track, right? Because what we also know is we're losing a lot of that talent. Like you said, they're bringing in consultants. That's because the consultant has niche specialization in a certain area that you don't always get at entry level. And then also, once they gain that experience, like we talked about entry level pathway, but then there's leadership pathway. But then how many people, once they establish themselves in a leadership pathway, are we losing those leaders from our organizations? And Rachel, you might want to chime in on this one, but as far as leadership track, what did that look like for you? And then once an organization invests all that time into developing a leader, but we know that we're losing them, where are they going?
I think a lot of times millennials especially tend to get frustrated. And so they don't stay in an organization more than 2 to 3 years because their currency is time. So they're thinking about a work-life balance, what that working world looks like. They're not interested in being the backup quarterback that spends their time on the sidelines. And what they find is that the organization's hired them to do something, to work on a project that they necessarily can't achieve because for whatever approach, maybe it's, fragmented systems or the leadership and the structure of the organization isn't set up to let them make those changes in a timely manner. And so they do get frustrated and they leave and they go somewhere else, like an Amazon or a Google or somewhere where it's more nimble and quick and they can get things done and they see a return on their investment.
Well, hey, both of y'all shared before we started recording that y'all both are probably the two highest paid people in all of healthcare supply chain. I mean, you both said 7 figures, so I'm assuming that. But my point is money an issue in bringing new people in? Is that a huge factor? Can they make more money at some of these other companies in the same kind of parallel role?
Absolutely. I think they can. Just to share some personal history, when I started, I had 6 different job offers, and this was the lowest paying job. But I took the job because of the mission and the passion, like we've talked about. And I felt like if I invested in the organization, that I could grow, and I'm proof that can happen. But I'm also a unique situation because you don't always have that career growth ladder where you have stair steps for young professionals to take. So they come in and they're, inventory clerk and they stock shelves and they don't know how to go anywhere from there. So then they leave and they have to jump to another organization. So just working on that career ladder growth and developing some of those positions is highly key.
A huge gap that we've identified here at Centura Health is between the front line and the leadership levels. And not just in compensation, but in skills, in the education that's required, and that we've created a pretty successful position as a bit of a stepping stone into leadership. We created a supply chain admin resident role, and it's new, and we're working on exactly what it looks like. But to Hayes's point, compensation has been a struggle because it's kind of a new role, not just to us, but we can't really find much market research on what they should be making in this market of Denver, Colorado, right? So I've had a tough time recruiting the right person that I would like for it because the pay range just isn't there.
And that can be really frustrating too, because a lot of, like I said, our systems are fragmented. So you're asking the individuals, the young professionals, to do more, to work with systems that don't talk to one another, that don't interface. And then they're having to do a lot of data manipulation to try to drive process improvement. So of course they do get frustrated and they want to go somewhere else and they evaluate, is this really worth my time and my energy?
And it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. By making the process improvement, they've handcuffed themselves into remedial work. And I think that's got to be incredibly frustrating, for somebody who's trying to build a career and build momentum. I mean, unless there's somebody else on the team that they can hand off the translation of that data once they set up the process, then they almost become a slave to their own process improvement, instead of putting it into place and letting it continue on its own, and they can get to the next process improvement. Would you agree with that? Just in the handoff and those manual efforts that you're talking about, Rachel?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of our culture drives that specialization in our industry because our systems are so fragmented that we go into specializing in one piece of healthcare supply chain because we find that that's the avenue and the pathway that already exists. But if we can establish more ways to open those opportunities up, then we're going to establish overall a better approach to healthcare supply chain.
Yeah, just the comments that are being brought forth, Deric started it with the quality of people coming in on these degrees and these new areas they're coming in. This young professional group, there's almost a challenge of another reset in my mind. I keep hearing we're resetting everything with supply chain with what's happened the last 2 years. Labor issues, contracted labor issues. We've got people we can't fill positions, but the titles and the roles and responsibilities that we used to have, I'm just a par guy. I'm just a receiving guy or gal. I'm just a purchase services, contracting, buyer. I think we have to redefine what that looks like. What is that true skill set with HR? And we might be redefining what the compensation model is because you're getting quality people. I remember getting I was just, oh my gosh, we got someone who understands inventory. Oh my gosh, they understand how to restock and stock a shelf, and I was excited to get that person hired. Now, when we get this young professionals group and as it continues to evolve, I think there's another reset and you get the comp models up where you take two positions and you make them one because they can handle it, because they understand it. Do you feel like that's a direction we're going? Do you feel like that's an opportunity to grow this?
Absolutely. We saw that at AHRMM, we had a number of presentations on this topic, specifically about new positions being created in the market, inventory operations, even positions in value analysis around product substitutes, positions that traditionally haven't existed. It's been out of sight, out of mind. But because of the pandemic, now we're looking at our sourcing strategies. And do we have not only a backup, but a tertiary product set up? Do we know what all of our cross-references are? Like things like that we traditionally didn't have to spend as much time on because we were contracting and sourcing, through one or two suppliers.
So as we kind of tie all this together, because I think Gary's right, we do need a reset. And there's some things to be thinking about, like specialization and how do we rewrite these job descriptions? There's so much. But I think it's always important as we wrap up these interviews to sort of paint a picture and give people something to think about that they can do to influence this. Because there isn't anybody who's listening to this show who doesn't know that they're suffering from a workforce shortage. And so there's got to be something that you feel like we can all do to not only bring new talent in, but to make sure that we're really taking care of the new talent that comes in so that they want to stay, so that they're getting the intrinsic rewards of career growth and development. And also, one of the things that we talked about was building community. And part of that destination career is not only community, but a healthcare supply chain culture that people are drawn to. So do each of you, as we wrap up, have any insights on what you think that anybody who's listening out there, they can be on the supplier side, they can be on the healthcare side. What can we all be doing to really drive this forward, especially now that I think in a lot of cases, there's a lot of attention on healthcare supply chain that just was never there before. We need to really capitalize on it while the light is shining.
We have such an opportunity to do that. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie The Interns, but it's with Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson. And it's great. It's a comedy if you haven't seen it. Lighthearted movie, but it shows that you can start a new career at any time. And I think after the pandemic, we've seen that. People are more willing to go and jump and take new risks and do remote work or a hybrid work schedule or pick up and move halfway across the country because they can, because they're more willing to take that risk because they know that life is short. So I think that if we can figure a way to capitalize on that, then we can bring new people into healthcare supply chain. And one of the things I think I would encourage organizations to do is to look at that career ladder growth and see how your structure is set up for your organization and what entry-level positions you have and where do you need to build from that. And then I think I would say for internships, this is something interesting, and I had not thought about this, and it's a shout out to Dr. Randy Bradley from the University of Tennessee. He actually said, go after freshmen and sophomores, not your juniors and your seniors, but your freshmen and sophomores, because they're the ones that are going to appreciate and value internship opportunities, and nobody's recruiting them. So if you can recruit them first, then they will go back into the school and they will rep your brand for you, and you'll start to build that base. So that's something that I would highly recommend that you do. Deric, what about you?
100%. I love that. On a more individual level, I think there's a few things you can do. One, join our LinkedIn page for the Young Professional Advisory Council. We have a growing base there that we're trying to connect and help them find new job opportunities or just find new articles or power supply podcast shows, things like that. Consider mentorship. That's something that hasn't been the number one priority of YPAC to set up. It's kind of a bear to take on, but mentorship relationships can be casual. Reach out to someone who's already in a place where you think you want to be and just see if they'll have some mentorship conversations with you. And then in the reverse as well, right? If you are looking for mentees, I'm sure Rachel and I can provide some names of some people that would be looking for a good mentor. So, and then third, I would say join your local AHRMM chapter. They are actually, a lot of the local chapters have had a ton of success with reaching out to universities and making that connection, whether it's with the supply chain program or with the healthcare administration program. There's folks in Michigan who have the professor at the university is on the board of the Michigan AHRMM chapter, right? So there's people that are really making those connections at the grassroots level. It is happening. We just need to be talking about it more. And like Rachel said, setting up our organizations in a way that really takes advantage of it.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming on, but I also know that one of the things it takes to drive this industry forward is free time and effort. And so this is something that you both are passionate about and you're putting hours into outside of your already very busy schedules. And so even fitting us in for this podcast is just extra work to continue to drive that vision forward. And so I want to commend you both and also thank you for your time. And I'll echo, get involved, especially online, because that just broadens your network. It broadens your exposure. We just did an interview with Matt Putman, and he talked a lot about touring other facilities. And I think that's how we really strengthen not only our own knowledge base, but that community, which gives us that sense of healthcare supply chain culture that we need. So Rachel and Deric, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
It's been great. Thanks, guys.
That was Deric Gallagher and Rachel Anderson representing the Young Professionals Advisory Council through AHRMM, talking about the need to create a pathway, but really an entry pathway for young professionals. And then how do we retain them? And something that we talked about that kind of came at the very end of the interview that we didn't cover after we stopped recording was that as we talked about where do people go as we build this leadership level, many people are going to work for suppliers or they're going into consulting roles because they're taking that expertise. And, Gary, you're a good example of that. I mean, sometimes there's just career growth that is going to come from that. And I'm not advocating either way. What I am saying is that it's a reality that a lot of talent is leaving organizations after they get developed, especially in that niche, or they really find their way. And then they are able to take that knowledge and that experience and further their careers. And so we're going to have to continue to find new talent. We're going to have to continue to develop talent. And the retention side of the conversation, is something that we've covered on other podcasts, but it will always be an important aspect, as you get better and better at growing your own talent internally.
No, I think they brought up a couple really good points, though. The retention obviously is something we can talk about for a long time, but I think it starts at the universities and the colleges when they talked about the mission piece that supports that. I think the conversation that came up, we're redefining what the roles and responsibilities look like in supply chain. And I think they have a really good point with their young professional group moving forward of looking at that and redefining what a job truly looks like and at what it encompasses now in hospital supply chain, getting that awareness out there and what they're doing with their tenure. I think they have 18 years total amongst them in their career thus far. I like what I'm seeing because we're getting quality candidates out of the universities and the colleges, and we're having the degrees specialized in there. So I learned a lot today from them, and I'm just excited to see where this keeps going. I'll be following them and the group that they're a part of as well. So great interview.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. But as a reminder, the best way to listen to Power Supply is on our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. You can find us on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts by subscribing there, or Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify. Or if you've got another podcast application that's your favorite, just search for Power Supply Media Podcast on that app. We also love feedback. You can send us an email if there's been a topic you particularly enjoyed, or maybe there's a topic that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, or you know somebody who would make a great guest. Just send an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. On behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.